Welcome to Tales to be Told in the Dark, episode 29. I wish to sort of carry on where I'd lost my train of thought in, I think it was episode 28. I started talking about Rudolf Steiner and talking about the four bodies or four kingdoms. We'll come back to that in a moment. Interesting observation with this full moon, and bearing in mind we have just passed the equinox. As I record this, it's 9:30 in the evening, and the moon is so bright it is pretty much imitating the sun in the way that it moves and how it casts the light on the hill, the opposite side of this valley. And it's exactly 12 hours apart from the sun doing exactly the same thing. It's like having a twin sun in the sky, which I just find that a very interesting observation. So anyway, back to the topic of Rudolf Steiner and the four bodies. I think I got as far as mentioning the mineral kingdom and only having a physical body, but rocks contain an energy. How do I know this? I refer you back to a previous video where I talked about raging toothache, that sort of intensity where even the slightest touch of anything against the inflamed area is like an electric shock goes through the nervous system, and it's very painful. That kind of intensity of what is called toothache, but obviously the tooth doesn't actually ache, it's the inflamed nerve endings that are sending a signal. And I was advised by a very good friend to get a piece of amber, which I so happen to have to hand, and I very carefully touched the side of the face with this amber, and within seconds that intensity of pain just dissolved. So what actually caused that? Was it my belief, and therefore, because I believe it, I'd put an energy into that mineral, and it then conducted or radiated back? The question is rhetorical. It could be seen either way, as far as I'm concerned. I don't actually care one way or the other. What I appreciate is that the thing works. I don't need to understand how it works, whether the rocks have an energy of their own, or whether it is an interaction between myself and the energy I'm projecting that is then reflected back by the piece of amber in this particular case. It's what I've quoted from the film Wagner, and the part played by Richard Burton, where he says about instead of getting on with living, we've been focused on studying living, or something along those lines. I can't remember the exact wording now. And I'm sitting here in the dark with little more than sort of a candle flame in brightness on this little light beside me. So I could find the quote. I have it written down, but it's there to be found. It's on a short on this channel for a start. It was announcing the Wagner's prose works, which will be given in audiobook form coming very soon. I had a trial run earlier today, which to me it didn't flow right. I wasn't happy with it, so I've deleted it. So I will, but it's all a learning curve by experience. So as part of that, you'll find there's a new playlist of which the preceding video to this, Purple Pill Poetry. And I thought, which channel should I put that on? Should I put that on the art channel as it's poetry? But I feel the subject matter in some of the poems would suit this channel better. Not least because it reaches a wider audience that is more attuned to the frequency of the messages of this channel, shall we say. Whereas the WAB-ART Productions is more purely about art. Although you'll find playlists with the deeper meanings and the esoteric meanings to things that are featured on that channel. So that's the first body, the mineral kingdom. It's the physical. Now next is the plant kingdom. Now this has a physical body and an etheric body. Now we come to the next two, the animal kingdom, which has three bodies: the physical body, the etheric body, and the astral body. Now you'll notice with animals, their spine has a greater area of, shall we say, contact with the astral impulses and influences. So the spine of an animal has certainly with mammals, it has and the same with humans, it has all the nerve endings going down and coming off the spine. It is a tree of knowledge, it is a tree of life within a physical body. And therefore animals will have a greater surface area with the interaction with the astral. Hence horses will leap about and trying to fly, whereas a cow is more of a plodding, earthy creature, hence Taurus being an earth sign that covers the entire sort of bovine family. And they're more sort of lumbering and more earthy. But again, the spine is exposed, as it were, to the astral influences. Now when it comes to humanity, we actually have four bodies. We have the physical body, obviously. Now outside of that is the etheric body, and then your astral body, and then your eye organization. When you go to sleep, the astral and the eye organization separate temporarily from the physical and the etheric, which remains in a sort of horizontal position, and the etheric is keeping things ticking over, the physical body is just being. And then whether you remember it or not, you go off into another form of days in 2 days world, shall we say. And as you awaken from that dream state, the astral and the eye organization are now coming back into the physical body through the souls, and it's basically a vertical, what's the word I'm looking for here? It's a vertical rotation of the two of the non-physical bodies coming back into the physical body, and then they pass back out again and do this loop. It's like cogs in a pocket watch. It's clockwork almost. But obviously this is all in the metaphysical, not in the solid material. You can't see those other three bodies, but They are definitely there, and they interact and work with each other. It's a perfect example of staying in balance, because if you go too high, the oxygen gets thinner. And then the astral body can go in too deep. If you go below the water and go to a certain depth, the pressure gets so great, and the etheric body doesn't like that. So you're being shown in a very physical sense. There's a balance between the two, not too high, not too low. You'll see it replicated also in breathing. It's an ebb and a flow, like the tide does. You breathe in and then you breathe out, but there comes to a point where you can't breathe in any further. You would just explode. So there has to be a balance, and then the breathing out. But then that needs to reach a point where it stops, because there'd be nothing left to expel, and you just end up with lungs full of vacuum, which probably wouldn't be much good for the physical body or its continued existence. So there's parameters to these things, and between the two is the balance. But it's like a gentle sort of rocking, or ideally it's a gentle rocking motion. It's very much like that S of between the yin and the yang. It's a meandering between breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. And it's something that, especially when you go into the dream state, the physical body just does it. There's no conscious requirement to instruct the body. It just does it. It just does its thing, and all the organs, all the functions, the blood moving round inside, that is the life. The depositing of minerals, minute amounts of different, I think it's 100 or so transient metals that are, and various other minerals and things, as and where the body needs them. These things are being picked up, dropped off, picked up, dropped off, all around the body, keeping things in balance. And as we feel different sensations, and you get you have increases in adrenaline when needed, or serotonin for the sleeping and things. There's adjustments being made continuously, keeping everything finely tuned, hopefully. Obviously, it depends what you consume, and that can consume you from the inside. Anyway, the point I was going to make about the real difference, for example, between the animal kingdom and humanity and the plant kingdom. You can take a cutting of a plant or a tree, and you can basically clone and grow another one from that cutting. Or there's such a thing as grafting, where you can take part of one tree and then graft it onto another one and bandage it, and it fuses as one, but that branch will still produce the fruits that it would have produced. So, for example, an apple or an orange tree, you can have one or other, and you can graft on different species of apple to the apple tree, or different species of orange to the orange tree, but those branches will produce what they were going to produce. Now, obviously, with the animal kingdom and humanity, you can't chop a limb off and then grow a second one. So there's a huge difference there. Also, we have both the animal kingdom and humanity have a sort of freedom to move about. They're not rooted physically into the earth. That's not to say that any of these four kingdoms are any greater or lesser. They are just different perspectives of the same thing. But that's the fundamental difference between the plant kingdom and the animal and kingdom and humanity. It's this mobility. And obviously the rocks, the mineral kingdom, they're just a physical body, so they also don't have movement, although you do have this story of rolling stones. I don't know how true it is, but there seems to be something in it. I'm certainly not going to dismiss it out of hand, but at the same time, I don't feel qualified that I could say yes it is or no it isn't. It's not something I've seen or experienced. But at the same time, I do feel energies from rocks, and particularly where I've been doing quite a bit of construction work with rocks, I find myself talking to them as much as I talk to trees and plants and things. And I often I find it amusing. I think to myself, imagine somebody watching going, who is he talking to? And again, this is all perspective. It's something else I wish to talk about. It's something that's I'm witnessing through conversations, and it's quite interesting, an observation. Let me explain. This community, I don't know if it's just a perception of what would be classed as off-grid communities. There's no sort of, as far as I know, there's no sort of singular organised, shall we say, a corporate guidelines. Communities are communities, and there's no sort of organised body of control over all of them. It's not like the pyramid system of the material world, of commerce, for example. So there's this perception that I'm working really hard all the time and I'm not taking time off. There's also the perception of work. So I think probably the best way I could explain, well, what I'm seeing from this is the feedback I'm getting is based upon comparison with something that the observer is familiar with, like the working world. So the concept of here is being applied, but it is just not so. So, for example, I'll run through today. What did we do? We didn't get up. Well, let's go right back to the start. I woke up, and the first thing I do is I don't move. I don't physically do anything. It's plan out the day as you wish it to be, and you put feeling into it. Now, there's also there's two elements that come into this that have actually come from the system. So often it is mentioned about these long-term agendas. Now, the pattern seems to be with the system that it does not have the ability to create. Now, you can see it as part of a computer game, and it's part of this challenge of this level of the game, shall we say? Or you can see it as some sort of sinister entity. There's a level to all of this where you start, well, for me, I can only speak for myself, but you start to see that there is some sort of albeit twisted, but there is some sort of guidance that is being shown from this external world and from the system itself. It's whether you can unravel the story, the twists that have been put into it, but at the same time you can look at the patterns and the, shall we say, the tactics, and look at it with a different perspective. So if I look at the system, it works very much on the principle of a pincer movement. Now, if you think about this, think of amusement arcades, and you have that thing where you put the money in, and you've got this joystick, and then there's this claw thing. You can move it across and further back, and then it will drop down, and potentially it's meant to pick up a soft toy and then drop it down the chutes. But it's set in such a way that most of the time there's not sufficient pressure in the three claws. Now, I can't help but seeing the comparison to what are called the Abrahamic religions, the Jewish religion, the Islamic religion, and the Christian religion, as all being part of the same thing. Now, is that the case? Well, I'm going to put a link into a very fascinating video that sort of landed in my lap. I was listening to, I think it was Franz Liszt, one of the Hungarian Rhapsodies for piano, and it was like next on the list, and it's like, this has got my interest. I feel I need to hear this. The title was something like, Did Rome Create Islam? And it's like, that sounds interesting. I know what I feel about this, and it'd be nice to see if it's confirmed or going to show me something very different. As it turned out, it confirmed what I think. Now, we've probably gone off a little bit on a tangent here. So, suffice to say that if you look at the system, it sets up win-win situations. So it backs both sides. It will back the blue party and the red party in politics. And it would appear to be polar opposites, but it's two wings of the same monster. Now, when it comes into the unholy trinity aspects, I mean, you've got that with the city of Washington, Washington DC, City of London, and the Vatican are independent states. One is the military side, another part is the finance, and finally the sort of religion, which is sort of usurped spiritual growth. So you've got this basically like an eagle with the claws again. Anyway, so perspective, coming back to that again. Learning from and adapting what the system has adapted from nature and used to its own ends, it's like, well, it can undo the twist. So, for example, one of the big determining factors on how the day is spent will be determined by how hot it is, whether it's raining. It's very much depending on what the weather does, but there's always a plan of something, or if the weather is not suitable to do this, then there's a plan B or a plan C. So the time is utilized most effectively. And that's another thing I've noticed. Whilst it would seem like you'd have all this time on your hands, I don't know where the time goes, because although it's a very relaxed pace and there's nothing frantic about it, it's not hard work unless I choose to make it hard work. And do as much as you feel like doing, and then if you feel like having a break, have a break. Straight away, can you see how vastly different it is to the outside world? From my perspective now, if I was to see somebody walking along with a mobile device in their hand and they're looking down at the screen, that in itself would look very strange, such that it doesn't happen here. Now, the whole concept of work. Now, I can understand if I was doing some of these activities, like say stripping bamboo, if I was doing that for a minimum wage, there would not be the interest there would not be the incentive there, and it would feel and very repetitive and very boring and mind-numbingly tedious. But that same activity, when you're doing it for yourself, when you're doing the whole process of selecting and cutting the bamboo, cutting it to the lengths you require, stripping it of the outer casing that goes all dry, you take that off because it prolongs the life of the cut bamboo to use. And it also makes good compost and ground mulch as much as anything else. And then obviously the very tops of the bamboo cane with the leaves and things, they're removed as well, and they get used as a compost or a covering to keep moisture in the soil. So there's zero wastage with any of it. It all gets used. If worse comes to worse, the very sort of bent off cuts and things where the bamboo cane may have sort of leaned over and it's grown that way and it's now got this bow in it, which would be no good if you want straight pieces, it can always go as firewood for the cooker, because then it gets turned to ash, which will be put back into the soil. So again, there's zero waste. There's no packaging to worry about with that sort of activity. And because you're doing it for yourself, it doesn't even feel like work. There is also the obligation, shall we say. If I step in between any plant and nature and I plant seeds in neat sort of straight lines, like a row of lettuce or something, I've become an intermediary between the life of that seed and nature. Therefore, I have given myself a responsibility to nurture those seeds and make sure that they get sufficient water. And there's also the adjustment, so it's worth putting them in pots. Is this spot that they're in giving them too much sun? Because it's very intense at the moment and it's almost acting like a magnifying glass. So I can move the position of the pots into more shaded areas as which suits each seed as it grows to give the optimum to the growth until they're more established and that they can be planted. But it really is a matter of life and death for some of these seedlings. So it's like, well, I've got to take responsibility for that, because I've created this by planting those seeds there. So I now feel like I want to look after them. It's in my interest to look after them because it's going to provide food, and very healthy food, because it's grown naturally. It's not force grown. It's not having anything artificial sprayed on it. I can't comment on these straight line clouds and the effect of what they're having, but there's another pattern with these system narratives. There's nothing is done with a singular purpose. There's always a multiple agenda, because it can be exploited as much as anything else to create or continue the whole divide and conquer tactic on humanity. And very successful the system is at doing it. I think you can't not agree with that. If you look at, when you see how much and how far-reaching this grid system of the system really is, and how it is trying to be everywhere at once and interfere with everything, or telling you that you've got to have permission to do this and permission to do that, and you can't make a move without that permission. It's very invasive. So this is, rather than sort of giving your sovereignty away and your power away, this is, as much as anything else, is finding another way of doing things that negates all of that as much as possible. But the pace is more of anything that's done here is more in line with nature. Again, this is down to perception. If you were to see a plant over several days, it would look like there's nothing happening. But if you were to see a particular plant and then not see it for 2 weeks, you would notice the difference. And that's pretty much the pace of the way things are worked around here. It's as and when. There probably would be a lot more done if there was more people here, because the motivation and the more people would give more options of creating more things. But it's looking at things with the long-term agenda aspect to it, of planting seeds, germinating seeds, considering, say, an orange or a lemon tree can take 5 years before it even starts producing fruit. So, and then it's, well, how long of a lifespan do these type of trees have? So it's like, well, let's learn how to germinate the seeds. Let's plant them in pots and see let's learn to grow these things, because it's an exportable skill that you can then use over and over. It's the same with onions. Cut the base off the onion, and then you put 3 cocktail sticks and you support it over a wine glass or a glass, and you have water. So this, what were the roots of this onion bulb now starts creating another onion. So thank you for the couple of donations I've had, because that has helped fund that. So I'm going on the principle or the basis of grow 10, 8 are for food and 2 are for allowing to go to flower. And onions that go to flower are quite attractive, and the bees seem to like that, those sort of violets and purple and mauve hues in flowers. And of course you're going to get an awful lot of seeds out of it for, again, the long-term planning with these things. So it's a steady, ongoing progression and staggered planting. So you don't really want everything all coming up at the same time and having to harvest the whole lot. It helps with the creating the variety, and then increasing the different types of things that we're growing here as well. We've also got olive trees, so we'll be able to make our own oil, our own olive oil, basically, as much as having black olives, which I could eat those all day. They are a favourite. Rather partial to those black and green olives. They don't come stuffed though, unfortunately. And they don't come in a tub, so there's no wastage. But I thought I'd try small batches. I've looked at well, it was Grow sent me a link, and it's quite a simple process. But when you harvest olives, you've got to change the water every day. I think it's for about 10 to 14 days. And then there's a specific amount of salt you add, and they will keep for months like that. And I thought if I do in what were cans that had, I think it's chickpeas. It's like, well, there's a use for those cans and small batches. So until I still master the technique with the olives, it's like, well, if things go slightly wrong, I'm only going to lose a small amount of them, and it's all a learning curve. There's no mistakes with any of this. It's doing things in a different way, so you're becoming more multi-skilled. Whereas if you look at the way the world has gone, everything has become more and more singular focused, compartmentalized, and a complete lack of skills, to the point where you have a shortage of craftsmen. But scarcity is the name of the game with the whole system. It's another one of these blueprint patterns that's used. So it's doing things in a different way. But so hopefully that has explained the whole thing about perspective, how really it is really different from probably what most of you would think it would be like. The only way to find out is to actually experience these things. So I put out an open invitation before, and it still stands. If anybody wants to come here and have like an escape from the madding crowd, shall we say, and have a chance to just chill, relax, be with nature, try your hand at different things. Don't be under any illusion. It's not an Airbnb, and it really is in some ways very primitive, and a lot of people will probably find it quite off-putting, the lack of facilities and things. It's an open-air shower, which is lovely in the warmer weather, but not sure what's going to happen in the winter. But there's always ways around these things. This is the thing that humanity has, but doesn't seem to really use. That's the power of imagination, which is creation. To quote Neville Goddard, God is your own wonderful human imagination. Now, what are the limits to imagination? I can't give you the answer to that. Only you know the answer to that, because you know what you decide is possible or not possible. So you decide the parameters of your universe from that. Right, that I think has covered the topic of perspectives, and how if you're seeing a thing from a perspective of something that, like you're comparing it to your own reality and your own way of living, then it's gonna seem very different from the reality of what it is from being in this experience. Don't get me wrong, it's not easy some days. There are challenges. There are a different set of challenges, though. But the interaction with the system and the sort of concerns and stresses and worries about things like, how am I going to pay this utility bill, or how am I going to pay this Sky bill, or these sort of things. They're not, they just don't exist. The only one I have is the funding of keeping a Wi-Fi connection. So that, as much as anything else, it's like what I've said on the last few videos, any donations are most welcome. There's also the practicalities of food and things. But this is a transitional phase, so over a period of time, just let's take the onions as a prime example. It will come to a point where there will be no need to buy onions in because they will be self-generating on this land. Same with potatoes and pretty much every other vegetable and even the fruits. There's orange trees and there's lemon trees here. But it's also learning from the observation of when do these things fruit, how long are they in season for? Because that's another thing with the supermarket reality, shall we say, from the days of the greengrocer, where the independent greengrocer, where you would have what is called seasonal vegetables. You've now got this 24/7, you can have any vegetable all year round. But what is the long-term effect of that on the human body? I don't know the answer. It would seem to be going against a natural order of things. Oh, one final point. I'm pretty certain most of you have heard the expression order out of chaos, which I think comes from one of the secret society things. I did look on a Google search, and apparently it's a quote from a film that said, Nietzsche said, and it isn't actually Nietzsche who said it, it's the film quote that actually says it, order out of chaos. But how do you hear that when you hear order out of chaos? Because that can be interpreted, again, this is perspective. How do you interpret that? Do you see it if there is chaos and out of that chaos will be created order, like it's a one transaction? Or do you hear it as by keeping the chaos continuous, it is creating an order? It's a sort of like a manipulation to keep the thing going. And order out of chaos, that also suggests that there is an order, like in set patterns to the blueprints of why certain things are rolled out at certain times, or the order in which they're laid out. You get these repeat patterns with so much with the thing called his story, the history. It's the same story repeated over and over, that even the theme of repeat. Repeat is in the education system, learn by repetition, like the 12 times table, the Pledge of Allegiance, or whatever it happens to be. So you've got that, the learning through repetition, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, because, for example, driving, you want to have reactions that are second nature. Because if a child was to run out, without even thinking, you want to automatically be able to bring that vehicle safely under control so that child is not hit. And of course that brings in anticipation and awareness of surroundings with that particular example. So, yeah, this order out of chaos, so it could be continuously creating an order of chaos, and it's self-feeding. By keeping the chaos going is creating an order, but then leads to a new chaos. And I think the modern term for that is called updates on pretty much every app on a device. What is it with all these updates? Why does a calendar or a clock need to be updated? What's changed about it? Or could it be that by altering one thing is having an effect, like a new computer game and how that travels through the Ethernet or whatever, does that have some sort of knock-on effect on other functions? And it's like, we need to do an update, which sounds to be more like an afterthought. Again, just a perspective on these things. Right, yes, so we're up to, wow, we've gone up to 45 minutes, but yes, I think we've covered everything for this video. So there'll be another one again soon. There is actually quite a lot more, but it will then end up as 65 minutes, and that's probably a bit too much. So we'll hold it off for a next video. Until then, love to you all and have a wonderful, wonderful time. If not, then maybe see things from a different perspective. Stay neutral to it all. Just observe it, see it for what it is, and don't allow it to affect you. Don't allow the external to have a control over you where you're importing false evidence appearing real, i.e. fear. Fear and doubt. Find that sovereign inner core inside yourself. Stand in your power. And strive to be the best version of you that you can be, and celebrate and be your individual self. Shine, let the world see you as your individual expression of you. Because ultimately we are all one, but we are individualized expressions of one. Right, we will leave there. Until next time.